Now it's my favorite time where you become the experts. And really, colleagues, we at a university here, we are not all, trying to be diplomatic. We want to have a robust discussion on these issues, right? You all approach these issues from different disciplines, from different areas of practice also. And, I really invite you to bring that into the discussion. And firstly, introduce yourself. Who are you? What is your institutional affiliation? And then pose, the question to colleagues here. Say who you're directing your question to, or if it's a general question. So you are all invited, colleagues, to participate. What I usually do is if nobody picks up their hand, I nominate people. It usually works because then other people also start contributing. So let me recognize a few hands. A first round, yes, thank you. Introduce yourself and then shoot. It's up to you.
Good day. My name is Marius Göpper. I'm from the German Embassy. I have a question for Dr. Pularen. Now, in your input, you criticized the WTO framework for allowing countries to be overly protective of their pharmaceutical industry. In the same time, you stressed the need to protect the traditional medicines of the BRICS countries. So I would be curious as to how those two points work together, and I would ask you to elaborate on that.
Thank you. I'm Tamara Naidu. I'm from the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. I suppose my question was more to Sanusha. But of course, anyone who can identify with the question would be useful to get your input. My question is around the rules of engagement with African states. From South Africa, of course, being part of BRICS, has kind of lobbied its entrance around its being a gateway to the African continent. And what we saw is, of course, with the last BRICS in South Africa, that many African states, of course, were also invited in the African Union as well. Something that the Chinese BRICS also did last year, maybe not to the same extent, perhaps more strategically around their Silk Road project or other interests. So my question is, what are the rules of engagement with the African continent? Because what my concern is that what we're seeing is a divide and conquer yet again, and that without a strong AU coordinating among African states, that what we're seeing is a baiting of that role of leadership on the continent. So as Kenya or Tanzania, as their economies grow and compete with South Africa, we're going to see competition between states, less about regional integration. Thank you.
Thank you. There was a hand I recognized at the bottom.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Mata Paskozana. I'm from the BRICS Business Council. My question or comment will be an extension of yours, actually. Mine is specifically with regards to the New Development Bank, right? Because we've had quite a number of people inquiring with us, especially from the other African states. So the New Development Bank was formed by the 5 BRICS countries. And I agree with you, we're not just a small S in BRICS, because we're equal contributors to the fund, believe it or not. So what I want to know is that with regards to, let's say, someone, because now they're going to be opening up for the private sector after the conference. Currently, the New Development Bank was only funding SOEs, so now we're moving on to the private sector as well. So with regards to private sector projects, say if Africa is using South Africa as a gateway to BRICS and into the New Development Bank, say now the project, someone comes up with a project and it's in Mozambique, it's in Kenya, or whatever the case is. I want to know, is there structure in place to deal with that with regards to the New Development Bank? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go back to our panelists. I have maybe just, let me use and abuse my position as chair. I have one just for Prof. Sitas. I think I would be interested, I think, in just you elaborating further on the dynamics of coordinating amongst the different think tanks. So we have the South African BRICS think tank here in South Africa, but each BRICS country also has their own. And I'm just interested in you maybe going a bit further for colleagues who are not aware about how the think tanks work, and as you mentioned, under track 2, diplomacy. So I'd be interested in you just expanding a bit further on that, but over to you.
Okay, so then, the think tanks are different. Our political choice in South Africa was to open the think tank to all university and research networks in the country and construct out of them, in the areas agreed upon, think tank operations. For example, all of a sudden, the decision by the summit is that space becomes an important area around security and research. Now, what do we know as a think tank about space research? You have to go to the appropriate institutions in the country and construct the best you can for them to respond. So the think tank plays in South Africa a coordinating role. All of us think at different times. It is different in Russia. It is different in China, much more closer to the planning departments of the state. It is a think tank of 63 think tanks. So it's very state-centric. In Brazil, it used to be in the presidency. Now it's moved between the International Relations and Cooperation and the presidency. And there have been major changes in Brazil, so it's evolving, new people coming in. Before it was IPER that was running the think tank. So what I'm trying to say, in India it is subcontracted to an independent organization, the Observer Foundation, which is a policy and consultancy. So you see, they're different. But they operate within a logic. Summit decides these are the 10 areas of cooperation. Think tanks start thinking of what the policy implications are about that. Then it comes your turn. You do consultations, you put your stuff on the agenda. That stuff is discussed between the think tanks. The reason why the meeting is in May is to percolate things that go to the summit. And then they might be rejected or accepted. So far, most have been accepted.
Let me respond to the question around WTO trips and GATS and farmer from the global north. What usually happens is that farmer from the global north is not interested in undertaking research for the forgotten disease of the global south, because usually the returns are not as significant as they would get out of the global north or other countries that they would want to do business interaction with. And this tends to place countries of the global south and the forgotten disease at a disadvantage. So the playing fields are not level. It's unfair, because although WTO gives you that leverage, the multinationals can still say no, but that's not what we want. Or if ever they come up with a new product by altering a slight molecule on that product, they may say that you cannot use that product and get it at an affordable rate for your country. That's the first thing. However, on traditional medicines, and traditional medicines, as I stated earlier on, have got a long history. They are owned by communities. WTO does not recognize community ownership of a traditional medicine. And they say, we leave its regulation to local governments. And local governments, in many instances, do not regulate. The example of Woodia, it's one, where we've got a product that has got medicinal benefits, and it was left to local regulation. And local regulation allowed bioprospecting and piracy by multinational entities. And there was no mechanism from a global perspective such as WTO to address that. They say that communities cannot own the intellectual property of a traditional medicine. So that's the contradiction, and it's a situation where there's inequity in terms of how we regulate, the intellectual property rights. If it's traditional and the community owns it, or a community of individuals who are practitioners in that space, there is no recognition of that patent or intellectual property. So the system is really not fair. And unless we come up with our own processes of ensuring that we are inclusive, we recognize the role of communities, the historical nature, and the fact that they do not have sophisticated systems such as exists in the global north in terms of intellectual property for the farmer, then we are not going to be inclusive, and we are going to leave people behind. The pharmaceutical industry will come in, steal that product through piracy, and then go and commercialize it and not benefit the local communities. That's the point that I was trying to raise.
Thank you, Tamara. It's a difficult question to try and unpack, because I think that the rules of engagement needs to be followed up in terms of the outcomes of that outreach partnership that took place in 2013. What have been some of the tangible outcomes in terms of the rules of engagement? I'm not sure. Maybe there's a process happening where there's a discussion and a dialogue and an engagement taking place through the AU as a coordinating agency in order to try and find some kind of policy or common ground where South Africa communicates to the BRICS what the African agenda looks like, what they'd like to see as well. But I think with having the regional office open and having its structure formalized, and hopefully the kinds and terms of reference and all of that related to project financing, it would probably create more of a framework around the rules of engagement, particularly in terms of the bank and in terms of how the lending takes place in that context. I'm not sure. I haven't heard much. I haven't been privy to any discussion around what the structure will look like, how the project lending will take place, project finance that happens in Maputo with the private sector. Do they have to partner with the BRICS country? It's still, for me, all very, very academic at this point in time. But I think once that becomes concretized, you may find that there will, I'm trying to put the two questions together here, you will find that there will be some kind of structure and formulation. Having said that, I think we have to also recognize that in South Africa we do have a new president, and we'll have to see what his BRICS strategy is, and more importantly, what is he taking to Sandton, Johannesburg, as the kinds of issues he wants to see and he wants to bring on the table.
Thank you, colleagues. I'm going to open it up to another round. Skumbuzo, I see. Okay. Nega, you can take that one. Skumbuzo, take that one up there. And then I recognize these 2, 3. And then that's it. Oh, 4. Okay. Okay, let's take them. Let's just take them. Skumbuzo, from there you can go over there, then we go that side.
Thank you very much. I'm Andy Pillay from the School of Governance. I'm really wondering what is different
And I want to make a candid comment, and I hope you'll accept it in that spirit. And Ms. Naidu beat me to the Davos comparison, which I'm a bit upset about. But I ask myself that this could be Davos. Who can disagree with economic prosperity, inclusive development, etc., etc.? So my point really is, how do you get there? And how do you influence the national policy makers? Because as you know, in South Africa and India, certainly, neoliberal economic policy has dominated the agenda. And here you want to be inclusive in terms of partnering with the private sector and so on. How do you get to actually achieve the objectives of reduced inequality, less poverty, etc.? What in the think tank's mode of thinking is there about the role of the state in economic policy? And when I hear you and when I see this document, I see nothing about it.
Vishwa Satka, I'm an academic from International Relations at BRICS. I'm not pro-anti-BRICS, but I have some serious doubts as a scholar in international relations. To Ari, your rendering of the world historical significance of the BRICS and the longue durée kind of thesis you put out. You know, some of us won't go so far. Some of us may go to the first few decades of the 20th century and the kind of deep crisis that was there as the analogy to understand what's happening today and the kind of counter movement, if you like, that the BRICS represents. And it also was, if you like, in the first few decades of the 20th century, a very dangerous time. It threw up fascism. It threw up some very dangerous forces at a world level, which I think are beginning to show themselves even today. The second point is this, is that I'm a bit concerned about the kind of theory being used to talk about the BRICS. It's a realist theory, and that's very conservative theory. Unipolar to multipolar. It has very serious implications for how we think about power in the world system and in the world order.
Hi, I'm Ricardo Barbaretto from Trinity College Dublin. My question's for Ms. Naidu. Kind of touched upon it a little bit, but how do you see BRICS evolving in the context of an ascendant China? Specifically, how do you make sure that the BRICS space doesn't become a Chinese space?
I'm Ashraf. I'm with the SA BRICS think tank forum. It's focusing on innovation and the knowledge economy. So my question to Prof. Sitas and the team is the theme, rightly so, is on inclusive development for the South Africa chairship in 2018. I'm slightly concerned that BRICS Labour, again, is not organized. We've been participating for 2 or 3 years, and again, Labour is a most important social force for inclusion in a rapidly globalizing world in the context of the fourth industrial. The fourth industrial is a Davos concept, Industry 4.0. It is filtering into the world economy, and BRICS will be another platform. And the most vulnerable sector is labor, because technology will be replacing labor in a massive way. We're seeing it in auto, in South Africa, we're seeing it in mining with mechanization. And so I think we should make a concerted effort to ensure BRICS labor is an organized force at the summit in 2018.
I'm Sven Volta. I'm from the Monash Society for Political Dialogue and Analysis, as well as from the Terrorism Research and Analysis Consortium. My question goes to you, Prof, and to you, Ms. Naidu. Both of you mentioned the word security. And I just want to find out and get your perspective on the future of BRICS and security. You know, will we see joint task force as far as security is concerned, maybe on a maritime level? Will we see a BRICS poll, you know, for argument's sake? So, you know, where do you see security playing out? How do you see it playing out in the near future or in the distant future? Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Christopher Franklin from Monash, South Africa. I have 2 questions. My first is for Professor Cetus. You created in your address this interesting dichotomy between the idea of a Western world whose power is waning, and then BRICS who's sort of rising to create a new world order. So my question is, firstly, what indicates to you that the Western world is prepared to relinquish their power? And secondly, how do you see BRICS continuing to navigate the possible tensions that they may see with the Western world in the previous unipolar system? And my second question goes to Dr. Tulare. In your response, you mentioned the Millennium Development Goals and the subsequent Sustainable Development Goals. And if we look at history, especially in terms of the Millennium Development Goals, we see that countries in particular made a lot of rhetorical commitments to things that they wanted to achieve, but in practice, we didn't see those things being achieved, or in reality, we actually saw regression on those goals. So my question to you is, are there any procedures in place in terms of BRICS to make sure that we don't just see superficial commitments to things like universal access to healthcare, but we actually see substantive policy maneuvers to see that kind of thing implemented? Thank you.
My name is Paramile. I'm from the BRICS Financial Services Working Group. So from where I'm sitting, we're seeing a lot of work initiatives on the financial services workstream, with the NDB being formed, and the next talk now is about forming the BRICS rating agencies, and there's a lot of other streams that are financially driven, and there's a lot of push in that space. But a few months into us hosting the summit, I'm not getting as to what are the key initiatives that are put forward by South Africa. As somebody said, that there are various questions of national interest among these 5 countries. So perhaps what is the next institution that should be formed that can begin to speak to our issues? Because there's a lot of talk and workshops, but it's only when institutions are formed that activity begins. It's only when people can put an application for funding requests from a bank that something is seen as happening on the ground. So I'd like to hear from the professors too. What perhaps are some of the key institutions that we should be putting forward after the NDB? Thank you.
We've got the African Regional Office in Johannesburg of the bank, but there'll be things in terms of the question around, when other institutions are created. For example, the rating agency, where would be their headquarters. And those are the kinds of things that give you political, social, and economic capital, because you then become that financial center, and that becomes the key driver. Just like how London and New York are financial centers by which the global financial community measures the commodity price and the Brent crude oil price and the gold standard price. I think China eventually will want to have an alternative to that, in shifting that. And that is where I think we've got to now look and see, are we moving between London and Paris and New York to Shanghai, Hong Kong, and where else? And I think there's almost an internal mechanism that India does not want China to become as powerful as that. And we have to be honest about it. There is this internal rivalry, etc. And I think even to a certain extent, Russia. The Belt Road Initiative just kind of emboldens China into the Central Asian republics, across the South China Seas, across the Central Asian republics, across the Middle East, into the Horn of Africa, into the Mediterranean. It's massive, it's expansive. But countries are actually thinking about, what does this mean for us? Do we let this go, and does China become the monopoly in this whole thing? So I think at the moment it's subtle, but there will definitely be levers to try and control that. So I'm not convinced that China will become the face of BRICS. I think in time to come, there will be internal dynamics that will try to control for it, but we can never say. Perhaps that's why we're here to think about BRICS in the 21st century and how we look at the role of Africa within that context. On the security side, there has been collaboration in cybersecurity. I think, or even support at, not last year, the year before, at the academic forum to place terrorism and counterterrorism on the agenda, which then got elevated up to the UN level. And this is something that they would definitely be thinking about as collaborative initiatives.
Before you get off the mic, Sanusha, I'm interested in your response as a lecturer on foreign policy on the idea of a conservative approach, use of unipolarity, multipolarity, and so forth. So I'm just interested in maybe a bit of your input, whether we are just simply, yes, moving from one unipolar world just to another, but the idea of power, still really on a material basis, still remaining the same. So I'm just interested in your input there.
I'm not even sure we're in a multipolar world. I think there's many centers of power that's currently around. Little centers of power. I mean, you've got the Asia Pacific, etc. I think these labels are very useful for us when we're teaching International Relations 101, and we try to contextualize it. But I think if you go back to my original point about a moving target, an international system that is not static, incredibly fluid, and constantly evolving, it becomes difficult to start honing in and identifying these kinds of theoretical frameworks around unipolarity, bipolarity, multipolarity, or whether there's polarity just in everything that we do. There are many polars around the world. There's a power center in Asia, but the Asia is then subdivided, or it's fragmented in its power base. You've got India on the one hand, you've got China, you've got Australia in terms of what's going on there, you've got Japan. There's so much of fluidity around how they want to construct power. And I think the idea of when we contextualize it around a realist framework, we kind of need to go back and say it's almost like a combination of realism, neorealism, and classical realism. For me, I would prefer to look at a foreign policy analysis approach in terms of structure, agency, and the relationship of the structure to the agent and the agent to the structure based on the power dynamic.
Thank you. Over to the other panelists.
Can I respond to the question around the commitments that we've made around SDGs? I think it is going to be very difficult to find that there's a uniform approach towards the implementation and the commitments that we have made on SDGs. And you are correct that with MDGs, for example, there were lots of promises that were made amongst BRICS countries, amongst the global south, the developing world, countries in the continent, the African continent, which were not able to meet. And it's a factor that is contributed to by the way the orientation of the welfare system is structured in that country, and the principles of equity and solidarity. If you look at what happened recently, where the 5 countries were trying to develop some common indicators on UHC, there was great variation in terms of what one country would agree to. I recall, because I was involved in some way in that process, Brazil saying that, this is not how we want to do this. We are not going to agree to X, Y, and Z. And eventually the process was not taken forward to where initially it had been envisaged to go to. So it depends on the orientation. If we are addressing the issue of solidarity, for example, solidarity in China may be different from how people view solidarity in South Africa. If you say that we have to create one pot so that there's cross-subsidization throughout the population, India has come up with hundreds of schemes, and they say this is how we address the issue of equity. And the UN's mechanism and WHO have come up with another descriptor. And hence, in my inputs, I indicated that when the ministers of health agreed to a goal of universal health coverage, they said that, each country will follow its own path depending on the orientation of that. So I'm not sure if ever the commitment will be universal, will be similar. It will be different, and it might achieve very different objectives and goals, and it might actually not take us to where, through Agenda 2030, people had thought that we were going to go to. So we may still end up in 2030 being where we were when we are evaluating the MDGs in 2014. I'm not very optimistic, but one always has to keep on endeavoring to achieve one objective at a time.
Thank you. Wow. Okay. There will be no solace from BRICS to our internal class, race, ethnic, gender struggles and conflicts and polarizations. BRICS is not about that. We'll have to sort out our own country. We are in a world out of joint. We are in a system that's moving from crisis to crisis on a world scale. It is ironic that China, amongst others, are the people who are holding the capitalist world system together. And the debate is on, is Chinese capitalism with Chinese characteristics or socialism with kind of Chinese characteristics? It is a fact that China and its growth rates, and India to a lesser extent, and other developing societies are holding the world capitalist system together, which might plunge into a next crisis quite soon, and so on and so forth. So all these issues are there for us to think through. And yes, clouds of authoritarian restoration and fascisms are all over the world, supported by large numbers of people, are on the rise, admittedly. And therefore, substantive democracy, socialism, all those ideas are in crisis at the moment within each border and so on. Agreed. But what the think tank represents now is consultations. What BRICS is trying to do is not destroying the only system we were capable of thinking after the Second World War, and that is the United Nations system, a kind of an idea, a parliament of nation states, but not a real parliament with a small club, really, that controls the power at a smaller scale. So what BRICS countries are trying to do is to alter some of the architecture, to alter some of the fiscal and financial architecture in the world, to change how flows happen. Indeed, everybody's pushing us towards the fourth industrial revolution. We need to ask, what for? Now, we've got the big data. We've got the computers processing the big data. We've got all these incredible complex new generations of students who are studying complex systems, the stars and so on, and they're there on the forefront. Can we turn that to developmental use and public benefit? That is the challenge of this artificial intelligence, whatever it is. At the moment, I'm struggling myself to understand what it is. But the issue is, can you say, okay, can you develop a gizmo like this that goes down to the community activists down the road, can monitor well-being independently of state and independently of anybody else? Can we do useful gizmos with that? Or are we going to reproduce the existing disparities of inequality? Think tanks have to think about these things. And it should not be a substitute for thinking in society, in social movements, in struggles, and whatever. What it does is just trying to maximize the possibility of creating an inclusive development. And it will be judged by it. And it was a hot air initiative. All I'm trying to say is that whatever we brought onto the agenda as South Africans has sort of happened with difficulty. So keep on pumping the ideas and pressurizing the system. That's all I can say. The financial sector, the Business Council is addressing those issues, and quite soon there will be a strategy addressing those issues about the financial sector and other issues.
So thank you very much to our panelists and to all our guests. And it's a pleasure now to bring to the stage Professor Sarah Musweza, who is the CEO of the National Institute for Humanities and Social Sciences, which is where the South African BRICS think tank is housed. So some of our boss.
Good afternoon. No, it's still on. It's afternoon. Mine is an easy one. I'm supposed to do a vote of things. As an institute, we were given a mandate to coordinate the BRICS think tank more than 3 years ago. Sometimes I wish, and with listening to the discussion here, Paramila, sometimes I wish we were given the mandate of coordinating the business side of it. Trying to coordinate academics is a challenge. But it's an exciting one. Everyone was talking about structure, agency, power, multipolar, unipolar world. Wow. It's going to be an interesting year. We were asked to coordinate, not to defend BRICS. And we means all of us sitting here and all of us outside of here. As academics, we're not good with defending anything. We're good with asking questions, and that's why the think tank in South Africa exists. Right? We are asked to ask critical questions, to engage, to influence the agenda with no fear or favor, especially apparently we have a new regime starting yesterday in South Africa. I therefore think that it might just be too early for me to do a vote of thanks. Indeed, at a practical level, and without sounding very rude, thank all the speakers, thank the Wits Business School and School of Governance for hosting us, for being here. A special thank you to IGD for always coordinating our dialogues and for being here today and doing this and continuing to do that. But it is indeed too early to do a vote of thanks because all of us sitting here need to do far more moving ahead. So I will only be able to thank you on the 31st of December when the work has been done. And the work is not going to be done by the Institute, by the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences. As Ari said, the think tank is all of us sitting here. The think tank also is everyone else who's not here. What we were asked to do is to coordinate all of that. And we want to do that, and we want to do that in collaboration with the many other IGDs, the many other HSRCs, and the many other schools of governance. As I said, our task is not to defend. Our task, what we've been asked to do, and I'm looking at Vish, is to think and think critically. Not to critique, to think critically and influence the agenda. And with that, let me also not be rude, and thank you very much for showing up here today. And we look forward to seeing you and more of you as we engage in different fora. Know that from henceforth, the dialogues are going to be truly BRICS. We're going to bring our BRICS partners, and we ask you and we urge you to bring BRICS partners so that we have truly BRICS conversation, not just South Africa talking about BRICS, the small S or the big S. With that, Pilani, thank you very much.